So let's begin again, and just to make sure that at least we have the right start, going back to earlier this morning, in making our ability to recognize our experiences as primary importance, especially today. So we also talked about clarity and emptiness. When we engage in the practice of Chenrezig or any other kind of deity practice, understanding the nature of that appearance is of some importance. So an appearance, of course, is an experience. So therefore, the experience has both a relative and an ultimate value. That is to say, it has, when we say it has an ultimate nature, that ultimate nature is inherent in the experience, though we may not recognize that nature, but it's there. We also talk about clarity and emptiness, and it's helpful when you see those terms that clarity is generally referring to an appearance, or you could say an experience. It doesn't necessarily mean a visual appearance. It means the appearance of an experience. So it could be an itch in your big toe. It doesn't matter where it is or what the specific value of it is, whether or not it's a part of your body or some memory that came from another time. The clarity is the appearance itself or the experience itself. And the experience also has two very important values, which we sometimes call the relative and the definitive values. So the relative value is where we normally land, is in that place. That is to say, oh, there's my toe and the itch on my toe again. I wish I could get rid of that. That's a very kind of relative thing because we don't recognize its nature. Not recognizing its nature, we fall back into all sorts of habitual patterns, and we work with those things from that perspective, which generally speaking, we say that's the source of all confusion. That is to say, we don't actually know where we are or what we're doing or what the nature of our experiences are, so we're just being blown around by a piece of speck of dust in the wind. So of course we want to come out of that place into a more stable, understanding place. So the way that we do that is the experience arises and we place our awareness on that experience and rest our awareness on that experience. And if the experience is a strong experience, like let's say it's the experience of frustration or anger or one of the strong emotional state, then it's more we say that's the more valuable state. So while Buddhism is not particularly fond of honoring emotional states, if you can see the state when it arises and rest your awareness on it, then we're very fond of it. Because we are now approaching actually having the experience of the nature of that thing. Generally speaking, the stronger the experience, if you can rest your awareness on it, the more benefit we get from that experience. So very uninteresting things, for example, like this little thing that we hit the bell with, you can put that down there and put your awareness on it, but it doesn't really magnetize you. You don't really kind of get into it. There's no real experience that comes further. You can think, well, it has a piece of leather on it, it's a piece of wood, it's very nice and all. And that's about as far as you can get. So it's okay, that's where we normally start. But it doesn't take very long before we want to deal with my anger, my jealousy, my greed, my pride, all of these things. We would like to be able to work with those things. In order for that to happen deeply, we have to be able to recognize the experience, and on top of that, we have to be able to recognize its nature. So the nature is comprised of two things. One, there's the appearance, which we call the clarity. Clarity, again, just meaning you have the experience and you see the experience. Seeing the experience doesn't mean you recognize its nature. You can see the ocean and not know what the nature of the ocean is, and unfortunately fall into it before you learned how to swim. So in the same way, we fall into the traps of our emotional states of all kinds, our attachments and our aversions. Without recognizing the nature of it, we get caught in it. Fortunately, getting caught in it is actually not bad, necessarily. If we can see the experience, then the next thing is we can understand that the appearance itself, that is the clarity, which is my ability to see the experience. If you can't see the experience, then you don't have any clarity. So the clarity is really important to understand. It's just the experience. It's the appearance of it. So at that stage, we are at what we call the relative. So the relative experience is what we're witnessing. The relative experience has to be witnessed before we can recognize the nature of the experience. Is it clear? It's like they come in a kind of order that we actually all experience, but we don't necessarily recognize the experience. So we want to recognize the experience. If we recognize the experience, we're just almost at the place of recognizing the nature of it. And the way that we do that is we have to hold our awareness on the experience. And as we hold our awareness on the experience, gradually, sometimes almost suddenly, but never instantly, it's usually like a gradual way, the experience begins to fade. It just begins to fade. Maybe it even fades and then becomes something else. But when it begins to fade, we put our awareness on the fading, and pretty soon there's no experience. And that is the union of emptiness and clarity that we read so much about as being so important. The nature of emptiness and clarity, or emptiness and experience. There's always emptiness in that other thing, because the experience itself came out of emptiness. Always. So we have many fancy words, for the emptiness, which we could go into another decade. But to know that the experience arises out of emptiness, that we never see. You never see that emptiness, ever. But the experience, you always can witness that experience. And that experience will not stay. It will always dissolve. And so we say that is the union of clarity and emptiness. Every time that you have that experience, you are stepping into the place of that emptiness, so you understand the ultimate nature now of the experience. The experience arises, we put our awareness on it, the experience dissolves, and we experience the ultimate nature of that experience. We see it exactly as it is. That is so critical to get to. And all of the complex practices that we're doing and trying to do, fundamentally, that's what they're all about, is to get us to the place to see the ultimate nature. We would like to see the ultimate nature of our own mind. It's critical. To attain full realization, you have to see the ultimate nature of one's own mind. And the process is exactly the same. Experience, recognition, emptiness, the recognition of the two, that is to say, where did the experience go? We don't normally even ask that question. We just kind of hold it as an assumption. Of course, I had the experience and then it went away. It's far more profound than that. We're not looking at it. We're just happy with it. Well, my back hurt, now it's gone. So we throw away some of the best opportunities by virtue of just being glad the experience went away, when actually it could have been something powerful because it magnetized us. We wanted to take our awareness off the pain, but we couldn't take it off because the pain was so much. So when the pain is so much and we see the union of the clarity and the emptiness, we are right in the spot where you have insight. But it's most helpful if the experience is really strong. The weak experiences are kind of like doing shamatha and putting it on something like this. It's okay, but it's not likely that you're going to have the experience of the ultimate nature of this thing. And even if you could, it'd be in the so what bucket. You know, it's like we want something for ourselves. So likewise, in the practice of bodhicitta, we always say that the bodhicitta is the aspiration to attain complete realization in order to benefit others. That's important because before we add the piece of seeing that ultimate nature, we have to do the relative piece and just make the aspiration, I aspire that I would attain realization and help sentient beings forever without any boundary whatsoever. And then when something comes into that sphere, it can be a very strong experience. And if we develop the habit, we kind of jump on that experience. Like, this is an experience. I look at it very, very carefully. I watch it gradually dissolve, and I rest in that state with the understanding that this experience has never occurred before and will never occur again. So that we just remind ourselves, this is not some kind of thing that comes and stays and then takes a break, goes away, and then comes back. This experience will never occur again. I think the kind of exaggerated expression like that is helpful. Like, how many of you know the Dorji Chang Tungma? Yes, so you know the last line of the Dorji Chang Tungma is the meditator is saying that I've come to recognize that every thought, every experience is fresh, completely fresh. And that fresh means it has never occurred before and will never occur again. Every experience is brand new. Of course, we're deep in the place of continually reminding ourselves that I had that experience yesterday. And so in order to have the experience of it's the first time and it will never occur again, we have to get out of that mode of trying to keep categorizing and lining things up so that we always have this sense of it's never new. It's always something that happened before. Okay, that's enough of that rant. So I apologize. It's a good rant. I suppose that, but still it's a rant. Let's just be clear. Okay, so we're on page 12, right? Yeah. Generating the visualization. So here I think we should start by reciting the generating the visualization in English once, for starters, just once. And then we'll come back and kind of work with it a little bit. But one of the really nice things about the Vajrayana is we get lots of opportunities to generate things that are the union of clarity and emptiness. You already know. I imagine a bubble and I imagine it floating around. I already know it's going to dissolve. It has to. It always does. And when it dissolves, I need to be there because the dissolution is part of the whole package of the experience. If you don't witness the dissolution, you haven't witnessed the whole thing. And you've actually thrown away the good part. Kind of like you get the walnut and you crack the shell and you throw away the insides and keep the shell. It's not worth much. So, beginning here, let's read in English up through page 14. Okay?
On the crown of myself and sentient beings pervasive as space is a lotus and moon seat. From the Re appears the noble Chenrezig, clear, white, and radiating five-colored light. Smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes, the first pair of his four hands are joined together. The lower two hold a crystal mala and a white lotus. Adorned with jewels and silk, he wears a deerskin upper garment. His head ornament is Amitabha, and his two legs sit in the Vajra asana. A stainless moon supports his back. He is the embodiment and essence of all sources of refuge.
Now, while you read that, you are having an experience. And some of it, if you know the text and the method, you're having one experience. If you've never seen this before, you are still having an experience. So don't waste it. Put your awareness on it and watch it go by. So when we say on the crown of myself, that's not so hard to understand. It just means on the top of my head. On the crown of myself and sentient beings. A sentient being is it's any living thing, but we more technically say it is anything with a mind. And that mind is just as ultimate as your own inherent awakened mind. If you're a mosquito, you have the awakened mind. Myself and sentient beings pervasive as space. We can see there's a painting of Chenrezig up here. Many of us have, and many maybe still do, look at a painting in order to see what is it that I'm putting on the crown of my head. But let's also be clear. It is not necessary to see that painting. It is not necessary to get the visualization exactly right. So, short story. There was a 2-week retreat back in the 70s that it was the first retreat I'd ever done. And in that retreat, there were many visualizations and very complex. And I think I probably knew less than what you know right now if today was the first thing that we ever did together. But I tried for 2 weeks. And one of the things was I had to visualize a deity that was white. So for those of you who wonder, it's Vajrasattva. So I was trying to visualize Vajrasattva, who was white. And at some point along the way, maybe when I was really tired, maybe when I was not paying attention, or maybe it was when I was paying attention, Vajrasattva turned orange. Like completely orange. And at first I struggled with it, come on. It's like, you're white, And it was really frustrating. And I didn't feel like it was harmful or anything like that, because I've never really been much of a fundamentalist. But it was just fascinating that I could intend to visualize white, and then suddenly it was orange. And it stayed orange for 2 days until I raised it with the teacher at that time. And I said, I just hate to say this, it turned orange. I can't turn it off like that. Well, the response was very interesting. When you give up trying to turn it off, it will be white. And I remember thinking it sounded like magic, to give up something and then something else happens. But that's exactly what happened. It wasn't quite that smooth. It took me a couple of days to give up on it, because when I wanted to give up, then I couldn't really give up. So it had to kind of fall into the thing of, okay, I don't care what color you are, and move on that. And that was actually one of the instructions from the teacher. Don't worry about the color. Don't worry about the color. It comes and goes, we just have a starting place, and it's white. But actually, and that whiteness is meant to symbolize a sense of purity. So then the instruction was, the purity is not confined to a color or a shape or a form or anything else. So it actually doesn't matter. And little by little, that was a nice antidote. So it finally turned to where it was supposed to be, and it actually didn't seem to have much meaning or impact one way or the other. So I wish at that time I'd had the instruction of paying attention to experiences, but that didn't come for 10 years after that. And I think that actually we're all able to look at our experience and develop the habit of looking at our experience. Like when we have a lunch break, when you walk out, do your best. You're having experiences. You walk out, suddenly it's colder than in here. So there's an experience. Watch the experiences unfold one by one. And if you can, rest your awareness on the experience and see it rise and dissolve as often as you can. Okay? On the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space. Pervasive as space, we know what that is in the refuge prayer. It means all space is filled with sentient beings. Anything that has a mind is a sentient being unless they have attained enlightenment. So the Buddha had an awakened mind also, inherently. The difference between the Buddha and us is one small thing as thick as a hair. He recognized the nature of mind. And that was the difference between being the aspiring Buddha as a sentient being and becoming the Buddha, was nothing more or less than just recognizing that nature. That's what he said to the man who said, what's the difference between you and me? Nothing. I recognize that nature, you don't. That's it, nothing else. Sounds simple. Okay, so on the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is a lotus and moon seed. So what we're meant to visualize here is a lotus open on the crown, slightly above the crown of our head, not touching it. And a moon seed is a flat disc, which is the color of a full moon at its zenith. And on that full moon then appears what we call a seed syllable. The seed syllable, seed is a great word here because a seed is something that contains enormous potential that hasn't been realized, right? Basically. And so the seed syllable is usually a Tibetan character which is meant to be a seed for, in this case, we're trying to visualize Chenrezig. So the seed contains the potential of Chenrezig. Now, each one of us contains that seed, but again, we don't recognize it. So what we do is we go through this visualization process to imagine the seed syllable, which is on the crown of our head, and gradually that seed syllable turns into Chenrezig by a series of a few simple steps. And just to put it out there all the way, because I think the whole picture is good to look at more often than not while we're doing the practice. The seed syllable becomes Chenrezig, and over time and a few simple exercises, which most of you already know, you become that deity, Chenrezig. Important to understand, you did not become Chenrezig. That never happened and never will, because you already were Chenrezig before you sat down. Even at the time when you were completely confused, never heard of the Dharma, even committing vile acts with other people, you were still Chenrezig, but it was just the seed. So that's important, because it's important for us to always recognize that all of our practices are meant to bring us to the place where we recognize that nature, not where we make the nature, not where we become Chenrezig or the deity, but where we recognize it, which empowers us. The recognition, it's kind of like you realize maybe as a kid when you're a baby, you're trying to learn to walk, and you can't. All you can do is first not even stand up. Then you can stand up and fall down, but you can't even crawl yet. So finally, over and over, you finally get it. But the nature of those things were already always there. They just needed to be nurtured and brought to life. And so when we think of Chenrezig, it's important to begin with the idea, I already am fully endowed with that awakened mind, and everything that I'm doing is meant to awaken it. Okay, we're getting close to our lunch break here, so let's finish this up, the visualization, and maybe one more thing. On the crown of my head and myself, sentient being, pervasive as space, is a lotus and moon seed. From the Hri, from the seed syllable on the top of that seat, appears a letter which we could spell H-R-I with English letters. The Hri is normally drawn as a seed syllable, really in Sanskrit, but sometimes in Tibetan. The seed syllable is nothing more or less than a seed. It contains the potential of Chenrezig. From that Hri on the crown of our head, that seed syllable, appears the noble Chenrezig, clear, white, and radiating five-colored light. So the clear white is like the clarity. That is to say, it's the appearance of Chenrezig, the clarity. The clarity is already with the emptiness. The emptiness is always there with every appearance. Every appearance comes already endowed with emptiness. And that's what makes it possible for that experience to dissolve, is that it is already endowed with emptiness. Clear, white, and radiating five-colored light. So this is where we get into, if you don't already know it, into Vajrayana things. There's always five-colored lights in Vajrayana practices. Sometimes other colors also, and sometimes only one, but there's always lights. It's like Christmas every day. And so we imagine that from Chenrezig radiates this light, and five-colored lights. The five-colored lights represent the five wisdoms. The five wisdoms are the antidote to the five faults. So we can go into that another time. But the five things that keep us obscured and in the world of samsara and thoroughly confused. Those five faults, when they are eradicated by virtue of the five wisdoms. So the five wisdoms radiating from Chenrezig are the indication that Chenrezig is free of those faults. So Chenrezig is smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes on all sentient beings. The first pair of his four hands joined together like this, like we have. The lower two hold a crystal mala. So in one of his hands, he has a crystal rosary. And that rosary is meant to indicate Chenrezig's ability to attract confused beings from the depths of samsara. So, whereas some of us, we might say, well, we have the ability to really confuse people. And we even manage to do it to ourselves and then forget who did it. So we take it out on the wrong person. So here we have a situation where Chenrezig's presence magnetizes, for want of a better phrase, attracts sentient beings from the depths of their confusion. We all have that ability, and every one of us has had the ability and done it with somebody, but we don't know what we did. We don't pay attention to our experience, what to speak of somebody else's experience. So we actually have more capability, usually, and perform more kind of magical deeds than we're aware of because we're not paying attention. Smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes, the first pair of his four hands are joined together. The lower two hold a crystal mala and a white lotus. Adorned with jewels and silks, he wears a deerskin upper garment. So if there's somebody here who's 12 years old, they will definitely ask, who killed the deer? But of course, it's a symbol of something. The deer is a symbol of kind of cooperation and peacefulness. So we see, for example, many animals compete for food. They don't all compete for food. I've noticed that crows don't compete with food. They tend to eat together and not to peck at each other. They tend to share the food nicely. Just a few days ago, I noticed that. And I was asking somebody, do they really do that? Like, most of the birds are like competing with the food. Crows seem to like just come down and hang around and eat together until the food's gone. It's interesting. Deer are known for this also. They come together, they eat together. They're not carnivores, which is a piece of it, maybe, a piece of their karma. So, where are we here? The first pair of his four hands joined together. The lower two hold the crystal mala and the white lotus. The white lotus symbolizes, and I say symbolizes because symbols point to things other than themselves. So the white lotus points to the rising out of the mud, the lotus appears white and clean. And in the same way, the white lotus that Chenrezig holds indicates coming out of the mud of samsara and being clean of it. So this is the story of Chenrezig, an incarnation of Chenrezig, who enters into samsara, leaves the world of happiness and full realization, enters samsara on behalf of all sentient beings, but is untouched by all of the crazy things there. And so that's symbolized by the white lotus. On page 14, his head ornament is Amitabha. Now, this is one of the most interesting pieces of the visualization. Amitabha is another Buddha. Amitabha is a Buddha, and Chenrezig is an emanation from Amitabha. So Chenrezig came as an emanation from Amitabha into the world and is recognized as Chenrezig. So there's a lot of these things within the Vajrayana, where we imagine that Chenrezig actually originated from Amitabha and then appears as Chenrezig. His head ornament is Amitabha, and his two legs sit in the Vajrasana, which is basically a cross leg, but in a kind of slightly technical difference. A stainless moon supports his back, which is also a symbol pointing to his compassion having fully permeated his being in all ways. Okay. Then the last thing I want to do before our break is read this section through, but the last page is homage to Chenrezig. So the homage to Chenrezig is fairly straightforward. I'm going to read it once, just kind of quick. Noble one, referring to Chenrezig, untainted by the mire, which we see is symbolized by the lotus. Your form is luminous white, which means utterly without stain. The white symbolizes utterly without stain, utterly without fault. A perfect awakened one adorns your head, so that's Amitabha. With the eyes of compassion, you gaze upon beings. To Chenrezig, we bow. To Chenrezig, we bow is also short for many people. We prostrate to them. So, it's very interesting. If you engage in this practice enough, the day will come when you recite the homage and you experience it firsthand. Noble one, untainted by the mire. So you've come to the place of actually feeling, you have the experience of, this is a noble being. So even if you've not had the close experience, you still have the sense of, if somebody actually had these qualities, we would say they're a noble being. And if you recited this, untainted by the mire, your form is luminous white, a perfect one adorns your head, with eyes of compassion you gaze upon beings, Chenrezig we bow. If you had that experience at that time, you would definitely feel like performing prostrations to that being was appropriate. And the point of all of the pieces leading up to here is to lead to that experience so that you actually have that experience. In order to have that experience, you just have to get out of the way. There isn't anything else, because it's already there. It's one of those things where, kind of like the Christmas tree, the only reason it's not shining lights is you didn't plug it in. And it's a simple thing to do. So in this case, getting out of the way is not so simple. But if you look at the whole practice, you can see what you're doing here is getting out of the way. It's a ritual means of getting out of the way. Seeing what it is you're meant to see and getting out of the way so that you can see it. Some people have said, isn't that most of what life is? I think, yeah, maybe. Okay, let's recite the homage. Oh yeah, page 15, the homage. Melinda, could you lead us on that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jowo kunji magu kudo kazo sonje chi ulajen tukje chenji drolazi chenrezig Michael Jowo kunji magu kudo kazo sonje chi ulajen tukje chenji drolazi chenrezig Michael Jowo kunji magu kudo kazo sonje chi ulajen tukje chenji drolazi chenrezig Michael. We will do also the short dedication. By this merit, is that correct? By this merit,
may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. So we will have an hour and a half, so we'll come back here, those who can. I hope all you can, at 1:30. And we won't get through all of this text, I don't think, but we might, and that would be nice. So at 1:30, if you come back, we'll then have open discussion around any questions or things you'd like to cover in more detail. And following that, we'll have another little break, and then we'll finish with a short session of Chenrezig. Very short, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes at most. Okay, and Zopa?
Announcements.
1, 2,
3. Well, taking things in chronological order. First, potluck lunch. So there's potluck lunch downstairs. We probably need 2 people to help set up, if you'll raise your hands. Okay, Punsuk and Carolyn, thanks. And then they'll come tell us when the potluck's ready. If you didn't bring potluck, you can come down and eat anyway. And if you want to go out to lunch, that's okay too. There's places close by, and Linda G can probably direct you. Oh, they're listed on the back bulletin board. Then the next thing that I know of, this Tuesday, second Tuesday of the month, there's Green Tara practice, and there's the new portion of it. If you want to learn Green Tara, and just come for a half hour, 6:30 to 7. Oh, sorry, 6 to 6:30. There's a Green Tara practice led by Julie, and it's wonderful. It's quite good to be there. Some of it's in English, and you can get familiar with Green Tara. And then starting at 7, then the traditional Green Tara practice led by the other Julie. So please see either one of them if you have questions about Green Tara. Yesterday we started the first class on equanimity and diversity, and there were 24 people here, and it was wonderful. So it's on the YouTube website if you want to look at it. If you plan to come for the next 2, please do look at it. Please listen. And the next one of those is October 20th, and then one other class goes into November. Then in November, Lama Michael and Tim Campbell are leading a retreat on mind training out at the land. So that's already up on the site for registration. And then this Thursday is mind training group with Tim Campbell and myself. That's all I know. Willa.
I just wanted to ask if there were a few people who would like to join me in cleaning up after the potluck today.
Oh, good. Can 2 people raise hands for cleanup potluck? I will. Makiko and me. Okay, good. All right, that's it. Enjoy lunch. You don't have to eat in silence, but you could.